Hello, I'm Maddie and welcome to Salted Latte, a place where I like to dissect and explore popular language and prose. By watching this, you're now considered a cool cat, so congratulations. If you're interested in this sort of thing, I'd love it if you liked and subscribed. This is actually a part 2 to my colorful prose, how to write prose 101 video that I posted the week prior. The second half of that video, I got into some writing samples sent in by you all, my cool cats, my audience. My cool cats, my audience. And going through those submissions with you all was super fun, and I think it was super helpful, both for me and for you. I feel like I definitely sat down after that video and I started going through some of my own drafts of the book that I'm writing and parsing through those and revising those, and also maybe coming up with a second book idea. Bold of me to say, considering I haven't even put out the first one yet, but yeah, this is the part 2 to that because I actually was very surprised that I got so many submissions that I couldn't fit them all into the first video. So there's not going to be a little lesson in the beginning of this one. We're just going to dive straight into the rest of these submissions. But before we do that, I do want to say my little disclaimer. While I do have a writing degree, I'm certainly not perfect. I'm not an expert. I'm not the oracle of prose. I'm simply just a stuffed cat on the internet who spent a lot of time learning and writing over the years, working on my own craft. And you guys seem to enjoy when I share what works for me and what I've learned on my journey with you all. So that's what I'm doing. You don't have to agree with all of my opinions, everything that I say or suggest, but please do and try and keep it respectful in the comments, especially because this does involve other people's writing. All right, let's get into these submissions here. This first one saying, "Hey Salted Latte, I just wanted to say I've been really enjoying your videos. I love your puppet persona, and there's always writing critiques in your videos that really make me think about my own writing and how I can improve, so thank you." You're welcome. I hope this also is helpful for you. Okay, the context for your little excerpt is, not sure if this is necessary because it's spelled out a little bit, but the main character is caught finding the Queen's secret library. It's a fantasy setting and they're obviously into each other, lol. A hand touched my head and I instinctively flinched and my body grew rigid, but the hand was gentle, sliding down and grazing my warm cheek before resting under my chin and tilting my head up. My gaze met the Queen's, who had knelt by my side, and I was confused to see no anger or hardness in her brown eyes. "It's more of a failing on my part if it is true that you found my secret place so easily," she said with a fleeting small smile. "And besides, of all the people to stumble across it, I think I can live with you knowing about it." She stood up, still looking down at me, and held out her hand. I hesitated, staring up at her with widened eyes. I took her hand and she lifted me up, and by the new look on her face, I could tell she knew I was just a little bit tipsy. She laughed, which was, I think, the first time I ever heard one from her. It was a wholehearted laugh, the type that made the listener yearn to create another. But I had no more time to contemplate over that fact, and I instead had no other option but to hold onto her for support, lest I make even more of a fool of myself. "Don't tell me a drunk person is the first to ever find my library," she remarked to herself in denial, leading me farther into the library past a sea of books. One of her hands was intertwined in mine and the other pressed against my waist to assist in keeping me upright. I could barely bring myself to breathe for fear that her hand acted in the same way a bird does and would disappear at the mere sign of any sudden movement. Down a couple of steps, a circle of large curved couches were in the center of the room with a low round table in the very center. The very first thing I notice when I read this is that this paragraph, this second one here, is quite large. And that's not necessarily an issue, but I think in this case, I'm pointing it out because some of your dialogue kind of gets swallowed up in the length of this paragraph. And so I wonder if it might be beneficial to break it up a little bit so that way we can make sure that the dialogue that you have this Queen speaking is more at the forefront. "It's more of a failing on my part," she said, and then so maybe after this piece of dialogue we could add a space there. I'm kind of trying to break it up a little bit by idea here. So now they're looking at each other, and this is when we know that they're a little bit tipsy. And then we sort of get into her laugh, which I think we could have her laugh as its sort of own thing. And then here we can unearth this little piece of dialogue by having it start its own paragraph. So this is kind of how I would break it up if I were to break it up. Again, just because you have a lot of different ideas happening in this one paragraph, and you also have, again, the dialogue. I want to make sure that it's not getting lost in the sauce of this. I think this could also help with the flow of their like encounter and their body language. Like first they're kind of like a little smile, and then they're looking at each other, and then there's the laugh, and now they're holding hands. So instead of having all of that squished into one paragraph, you're giving all of those little moments of space to breathe, and it could just help those ideas flow a little better one after the other as they sort of progress in terms of their closeness, like their physical closeness, and their falling for each other. It also gives readers like a natural break to like pause and take a breath. And so that can be kind of helpful too as well. So yeah, if you're interested in breaking the paragraphs up, I would say maybe something like this. But again, like it's your work, you can do whatever you want with it. The other thing that I noticed, that you have a lot of like conjunctions happening. Let me bold some of them. Sometimes you don't notice them until they're sticking out from the text a little bit. I mostly noticed it in like this first paragraph here and this paragraph here, where, you know, I took her hand and she lifted me up, and by the look on her face I could tell like it kind of reads more like you are listing actions instead of bringing the reader into the action of the story. So obviously you don't have to eliminate every single one of these, but I wonder if maybe we could rework a couple of these sentences just to bring forward the action a little bit more. I took her hand and she lifted me up, and by the new look on her face I could tell she knew I was just a little bit tipsy. Maybe instead of starting with taking her hand, you could start with the action of the hand lifting this other person up. So instead of I took her by the hand and she lifted me up, you could say she lifted me by her hand. And then we don't necessarily have to change a ton about that second part. Just get rid of the conjunction because it is a little bit of a run-on sentence you have going on there. By the new look on her face, I could tell she knew I was tipsy. I did get rid of the just a little bit here because tipsy already means you're just a little bit. I feel like you don't necessarily need both of those. Tipsy is strong enough on its own. And then up here, if we want to look at this sentence maybe as another example, but the hand was gentle, sliding down and grazing my warm cheek before resting under my chin and tilting my head up. Sort of like what I said down here with just a little bit and tipsy. I think the motions of sliding and grazing across a cheek are quite similar, to the point where maybe you don't need both of them. And so that's a way you can get rid of one of these and little conjunctions here. I chose grazing for my example of a revision. You don't have to choose that one. But then, you know, like I said, you don't have to get rid of every single one. Like I think this and is fine. But the hand was a gentle grazing my warm cheek before resting under my chin and tilting my head up. Another reason why I picked grazing over sliding down was because I liked the little bit of alliteration that was happening with these G sounds here. So that's just one way you could do it, just to help cut down on any, you know, redundancy in your sentences, and also to provide a little bit more sentence variation. You're not having so many conjunction-based sentences, bordering on run-on kind of sentences. This sounds like a really cute story though, like a really cute fantasy romance, and I really want to know. I hope these people get together in the end. You'll have to update me later on. All right, let's move on to number 2. We have hello. Well, actually, hi. Hi. I saw your post on YouTube where you asked for submissions of writing samples, and here's my submission. So the context for this story is that this is a project of theirs. Prose is intentionally stylized to be like a little more archaic or old-timey, so we'll keep that in mind when we're reading through. I hope it doesn't make it too purple or inaccessible. I'm sure it won't. There's definitely there's a community, there's a niche for these sort of more stylized old-timey text. I might not know what all of the words mean because I don't typically read a ton of those books, but your audience probably will. But with that being said, when it comes to the accuracy of your archaic-ish text, I'm not going to be able to help you too much with that because that's not super in my wheelhouse. Maybe other people in the comments who enjoy this kind of genre and style of writing will have some other tips for you as well, but I'll be able to help you with a little bit of it. Hopefully I'll have at least something to say that I hope will be of value to you. I also hope it doesn't look like I use generative AI because I didn't and never will. We're sort of working on an honor system over here. It's like I trust you guys to send me in your real human writing, and in return I'm never going to outright accuse any of you of using AI to write anything that you send to me. Obviously, if you've seen my AI and writing videos, or really any of my kind of videos ever, you will know my stance on that, on AI and writing. But this is intended to be an AI free zone, and I trust you all to maintain that. All right. This person also requested, I believe, to change some of the character names in the story, so that's why we have Blue here. Don't make fun of them for choosing that name. That was my name that I chose. So Blue did not manage to tuck himself properly in his bedroll before falling asleep, and the orb fell once more out of his hand. It rolled across the stone floor away from him and out of his mind. But his mind was not left alone. In the dark, as the hours passed, he fell and fell far beyond sleep and into a dream. Wistful he felt now, and he believed he knew where he was, but how could it be? All around him were mists and faded silhouettes of trees. "Look what I can do now, little brother," said the figure behind him. Streams of water slithered through the air, like snakes performing a ritual of spirals, but the figure made no motions with which to guide the water. Blue's mouth fell open in awe as the streams flew above his head and poofed into powders of snow. "What about you?" the figure asked. Its voice now anew, though its face remained a veil in shadow. "Brother?" he wished to ask, but his mouth moved to say something else. "You've not taught me since yesteryear. Could you not train?" The figure bit back his words. "I have been hard at work with my training, you know this. I had to catch up, and now I am ready." Blue looked down in silence. This was not just a dream. He knew exactly where they were. The forest stood around them, swaying slowly in the wind. North they were from the village, under gray clouds, where they had made sure no one would find out until it was too late. "You could come with me had you been training." Mother would not allow. She's sick right now. Anger boiled bitter in Blue. How dare he leave? Now of all times, when their mother was ill and could not look after them. When she needed them most. When they had already lost. Take care of Mother. When will you come back? Blue looked at the ground. The snow that had fallen had already melted. Soon enough, dear brother. Blue knew not whence the certitude of his brother sprang, for he found only its complete absence in himself, while they stood there face to face, and his heart sank in secret. Silence reigned in the coolth of the blowing wind and underneath his eyes, but greater was the knot he was diminished to. He could give no more but 5 words. "Promise me you'll find Father." He received 2. Okay, drama. I like the tension between the 2 brothers that you have building here. Speaking of the 2 brothers being the characters, seems like they're both using he, him pronouns, which I think I mentioned this in one of the submissions from the other video, but just be careful with that because there were a couple spots where I was like, I'm not quite sure who is talking right now. Like, is it the brother or is it Blue? Like in this sort of section right here as well, I think in particular. Obviously this is like the figure brother. "I have been hard at work with my training, know you this. I had to catch up and now I am ready." This kind of almost felt like an extension of what the figure was supposed to be saying, so I'm not sure. Is this Blue speaking or is this also the figure speaking as well? Because here, I guess I'll add a quotation. there wasn't one there. I don't know if that was just a little typo or maybe like these accidentally got separated in the lines. I was a little bit confused there. And then because of that, I wasn't quite sure. I'm assuming you could come with me had you been training. Yeah, I just wasn't quite sure who, like which brother was saying which line. So maybe adding a little more clarity around the dialogue would be helpful. Again, that might just be a me problem because I'm not super familiar with this kind of genre or style of writing, so it might just be a little bit harder for me to follow in general, but I would suggest maybe like some more indicators of which person is speaking. Maybe what could help clear that up is if we include a more surrounding description around the dialogue. I think the dialogue is really nice, but if we had a little bit more description, it would help better flesh out this character dynamic between the two brothers that you are building, their relationship dynamic. You know, like what tone are they speaking in? What's their body language like right now? Maybe some of their internal dialogue, more of that. I know you have some a little bit. We could even delve into more description of the natural surroundings, like what you started to do up here with the mists and the faded silhouettes of the trees. If you were to add more of that description around the dialogue and continue to build that, you can use that sort of as a mirror to reflect what I'm assuming is there's like tension brewing in between the two brothers. So that could be really interesting to play around with if you're interested. Interesting if you're interested. The description you have here, we have, what do we have? Mists in the faded silhouette, streams of water, like snakes performing a ritual spirals, and then snow. Gray clouds, so it feels like maybe there's a little bit of coldness and bitterness between the brothers. You could maybe expand on this snowy, chilled energy to create some tension. Just in general, it feels quite like mystical and a little bit eerie, a little bit murky. I think the murkiness also like works well to build the tension. So yeah, I like the chill and the murkiness, I think are two aspects you could possibly delve into a little bit more, because right now it kind of feels like you're having them have a conversation and they happen to be in this environment. I think we could intertwine them maybe a little bit more. I like that you have the snow being melted after this point where you say like the anger is boiling in him, like the contrast of the hot and the coldness. That also could be something interesting to play with a little bit more. Again, I don't know sort of what is happening before this or what is happening after this. You might be doing that already. That's the thing with these videos, is that as much as I would like to sit down and read the entirety of all your works, like that would take so long, and I wouldn't be able to post consistently doing that. It's a little unrealistic, so just working with what I have here. But that's all I have to say off the top of my head. I hope some of that was helpful, and I wish you the best of luck on your writing journey for the story. All right, submission number 3. We have, for context, a man that is a demon hunter and a strange woman is being haunted by a demon. She is told to find him, I'm assuming him being the demon hunter, in an abandoned church, and this is their first meeting. Okay, I like that. Eeriness. All right. The voice that cut through the silence was smooth and sardonic. She said, "Are you certain you cannot just take one confession?" The man paused his slow pace, tilting his head curiously, considering her measured cadence of words with scrutiny. He let out a soft huff of a laugh, edged with disbelief. "You picked a hell of a place for it." His lips curled into a feline grin. His movements, too, were cat-like and languid as he drew his long limbs into a slow turn until he faced the shadow of the doorway. He tilted his head down to peer over his glasses at her, to gauge who she was even at a glance. In the dimness of the chapel, she was a haunting guise, her skin unnaturally pale and her hair impossibly dark. With her back to the faint light outside, a halo of moon glow cut her silhouette into the doorway. She took a step forward, crossing the threshold into the hallowed ground. Closer now, she was less a ghoul and more mortal. Finally, the silver-toned man stepped aside, his Cheshire, I think that's how you pronounce that, features softening only slightly. He waved his hand permissively, a casual and sweeping invitation into the cold stone temple. The stranger took the lead as they crossed the room. On its own, the door closed behind them, sending dust motes dancing through the stale air. Neither of them flinched. Okay, the one thing that I wonder might be nice to do is to separate this paragraph here, because you're talking about both his description and her description, and so I wonder if maybe we could have them be their own thing. And then it could be fun to play a little bit with the sentence construction of these character descriptions, because you already have a lot of nice descriptions and descriptor words. And if we play with like sentence length variation and stuff, I think that could be another way to further highlight this kind of haunting, ethereal, eerie kind of vibe that you have going on that you're building. Hauntingly ethereal. So maybe like really long sentence and then like a really short abrupt one. That like the word I'm looking for, is it juxtaposition of like those two, you know, really long and almost flowery, and then really like short abrupt, I think could also help to show visually this like eerily ethereal kind of vibe you're going for, because it's like it's a little unsettling because it's beautiful but there's something a little off about it. So if you get readers into this like really long flowery pretty sentence and then you like cut it off with something a little more harsh and a little less rhythmic, sort of juts out of place, that could be fun to do. Let's see, can I give you an example? Can I think of one in a reasonable amount of time? That also gives you the chance to expand on the description you have as well, if you want to add like a few more sentences, or if you want to maybe sort of unnaturally pale and impossibly dark. You know, I'm not a complete adverb hater, but they can be signs that like maybe we could think of a stronger word to put here. So like for unnaturally pale, you could do like bloodless, or how do you spell porcelain? Porcelain, or pearlescent maybe, and impossibly dark, something like pitch black, maybe inky, ink like pen ink. I don't know how I feel about that. Or maybe like moonless sky. And honestly, like if you can't think of some off the top of your head, there's literally no shame in googling like synonyms for whatever word, and like going to Merriam-Webster or something and looking through a list of synonyms. I think that's a great way to help build your vocabulary, as long as you're not like going out of your way to choose words that you just think sound like really impressive or smart. Make sure you're like choosing something that actually makes sense with the tone you're trying to convey here and like flows well with the other language that you are using in your story and your writing style. So just like as a little example of what I mean when I say like play with sentence structure, I rewrote this first sentence here to show you. So you have it as, in the dimness of the chapel, she was a haunting guise, her skin unnaturally pale and her hair impossibly dark. And when we switch out these adverbs with stronger descriptor words, and when we play around with sentence structure, we could have something like this. In the dimness of the chapel she loomed, her pale skin pearlescent like the moon against the pitch black sky of her hair. A haunting guise. And then you could like continue on with the rest of your sentences. Again, you don't have to copy me. I don't recommend that you copy me. Obviously, I want you to do your own thing, but just showing you one of the many ways like we could work with the long flowery part and then like a short, sort of surrounded by these short, more abrupt sentences or little sentence fragments. Okay, next we have submission for hi there, hello. I'm a subscriber of yours and saw your post about writing samples for your next video, and this email is a submission. For context, this is a fan fiction. Hope that's allowed. Of course it's allowed. In fact, it's encouraged, because I know fan fiction writers don't often get feedback on their stories until after they already publish them. A lot of writers start out in the fan fiction space, especially nowadays, either as readers or as writers or as both. I know I definitely was in the fan fiction fandom space as a teenager, and it's a really easy way to get your writing out there and to just get familiar with the craft of writing and keep up with your practice. So I'm always down to read a fan fiction, even if I don't necessarily know what the fandom is. The bracketed text was shifted to be more friendly to a non-fandom read. Well, that was very considerate of you. The bracketed text right there. It takes place in a low fantasy medieval setting. The POV character, I think Tristan is how you pronounce that, is a very lonely 10-year-old whose half-sister comes to court. He has never met her, he does not know her, but for all his life he has been plagued by uncanny, unnatural dreams, and he has seen her face most of all. He's taken to quote-unquote stalking her when she first arrives to suss her out. Tristan is very dreamy and disconnected from reality, which I tried to push through this perspective. Okay, like I said in, I think it was the second submission, I'm not super familiar with this more old-timey medieval kind of setting language or genre, so I can't speak to like the accuracy for those kinds of things, but we can still read and see what I have to offer. The girl thing was smaller than in Dream. The outline of her silhouette was burned into his mind, a lithe lurking thing drawn in sleep with only straight lines and harsh angles. Tall, tall above him, almost as tall as father when he did not slouch. Glimpses of her around a corner in the Royal Holdfast, a breadth away in the garden, watching her spar from the terrace above the training yard, filled the black shadow that skulked in his mind. But the sight of her in the full light of the dying day, swinging a blunted steel sword with 2 long limbs and knobby joints, all Tristan saw was a sullen tree. Sullen tree? Okay, just pulled that word out of nowhere. All Tristan saw was a sullen girl of 3 and 10, half-sister. Tristan did not really know how he could have a half of a sister. Only that father was not her father, and neither he or mother ever spoke of her, not even during their late nights in the sitting room. Perhaps he was not supposed to know. He had only ever known her in dream and seen her in the face of the weirwood? Bereft of baby fat with a spray of freckles they both shared with mother. Tristan thought seeing her would spark something, a fire, a purpose, a phantasm. Samsa or Samsa looked like every other lordling that made sport of Tristan's existence. I think this was really lovely. I don't have a ton to say about it in terms of critique, but reading through it did remind me of a couple of just general informational bits that I want to share with you all. The first relating to grammar and the usage of grammar. Part of why this was such a lovely read is because of all of the little variations of grammar, the em dashes, the commas, the periods, the semicolons, paragraph bracketing as well. Really helps you as a reader get into a flow, find those natural like pauses and stuff. And those pauses are important, not just like for you to take a breath if you were reading it aloud like me, but they add emphasis and they add meaning to the story that's being told, right? Like this half sister being here on its own line is much more impactful than if this person had just put it there, you know, because all that empty space really draws your eye to it because it's important to the story. And another thing about grammar is, you know, all of the grammar choices in here might not be technically perfect or technically correct. A lot of people have a very narrow-minded view of grammar and punctuation and the roles of grammar and punctuation in writing, specifically in creative writing like this. And that's because we're largely taught about grammar not through the lens of expression and creative writing. We're largely taught about it through like learning how to write research papers and essays and emails and all those sorts of things where, you know, perfect grammar and sticking to the grammar rules is really important. I feel like that is one of the biggest changes in perspective that I had going into my writing degree versus coming out of my writing degree was my perception of grammar and my relationship to grammar and the way that I use it and view it in other people's writing, which I think is so funny because I feel like for a lot of people, when you tell them that you're like going for an English-y literature writing kind of degree, they're like, oh, you must be obsessed with grammar, or like, oh, can you like edit this for me? The longer that I was in my program, the more it was like, grammar really doesn't matter that much. Like, as long as your intended audience can understand what you're saying, it's not like that huge of a deal. And there are also different ways that people use writing, commas in particular. I remember I took a copywriting class. We spent a whole day talking about how people perceive grammar differently and people use grammar differently. We used commas as an example. Like, you can be someone who uses commas like grammatically in the correct way in your writing. You could be someone who uses them almost as pauses, like in an auditory sense, like you're very auditory focused in your grammar, in your commas. You could use them in a visual sense in order to break up your text that way primarily. You can use them as a way to convey all sorts of things aside from just being a piece of punctuation that separates two words, is what I'm getting at here. And I bring that up because I think this piece is a really good example of that, of how you don't have to be exactly perfect with grammar and how there are different ways to implement grammar in a way that your reader will still understand your piece and it actually like elevates the reader's understanding of the piece. If I were to guess, this person probably is more of an auditory implementer of grammar or maybe visual, just because of where these stops are. I'm kind of more like that as well. I'm kind of more auditory. That's why I always tell you guys like to read what you're writing aloud, and why I prioritize talking about like the flow of your paragraphs and sentences as well. And there is a lot more leeway and freedom in the way you can play with grammar once you sort of come around to the idea that it's not as rigid as we are taught to maybe believe. Other thing that I wanted to bring up that this piece reminded me of, because they said this is a fan fiction, is the way that paragraphs are sort of structured and written. So like for fan fiction conventions, I spaced this text out a little bit more so it would be easier for me to read, but it was sent to me like this, and this is very much like on brand for what you'd see at like on like Wattpad or something, where you have a non-indented paragraph and the text spacing is quite small, and even the font itself, I believe Arial is like a non-serif font. There's totally no issue with that in fan fiction writing spaces. Again, that's like sort of the convention of that's what you expect when you are reading a fan fiction. But if you were ever to be interested in like tweaking a fan fiction to submit it for like a literary journal or something for your school, or maybe like just writing like a story of your own outside of fan fiction and you want to submit it somewhere maybe, or pitch to agents or something, this is not the way you would format that, which I actually didn't know either until I went to school, because again, like I said earlier, I had been in the fan fiction space primarily as my primary form of creative writing for most of my life, because my school didn't really have a ton of funding for arts and literature stuff, so I didn't have opportunities like that as a teenager. And the first story I ever submitted was formatted like this, and my professor was like, "Girl, that's not how we do it over here." So basically what you want to do is you want to make sure all the paragraphs are indented, and you want to make sure you're using a font like Times New Roman or something like Georgia or Garamond, just something that looks, you could say maybe a little more literary, a little more formal. And then what you want to do is make sure that your text is double spaced. I'm also going to remove the space before and after the paragraph. So this is typically how you would format it. You also want to make sure it's like 12-point font. If you were submitting to a writing venture outside of the fanfiction scope, every like literary journal or place is going to have their own list on their website or whatever with like specific requests for formatting, but this in general is how you would submit a piece of writing. And I'm telling you that not because I personally think like this is the only way you should format things, but I'm telling you that because if you don't format it correctly, you probably are automatically going to be thrown out, like you're not going to be considered. So it is important to be able to differentiate between fanfiction writing conventions and like more quote-unquote professional kinds of writing conventions. Mission number 5. Hello, I saw your post about writing samples and I decided to submit mine. The sample is from a story about a man coming to terms about his infatuation with his best friend, and this is just a scene of his morning routine. I like your channel and I really hope you succeed, and I really love your cat puppet. Thank you, my cat puppet also loves you. The only thing that made Leonard stop internally whining about work was the birds. Every morning after he turned off his alarm clock and started his day, he would keep an ear out for the morning doves specifically, for they were his favorite. This morning was no different. He threw off the blankets and shuddered from the chill that inhabited his room after October. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, dissolving the mist and steadily warming up the world. His ears strained for the coos of the doves, and he smiled a little when he finally heard them. If you asked him about why he liked the doves the best, he couldn't give you a concrete answer. Perhaps it was because they were his deceased sister's favorite bird, or because one of his friends had told him that they were a messenger of hope after her funeral. Either way, whenever Leonard heard his doves, he knew he would feel at peace. Okay, I think the first thing that I want to do with this one is to do the little exercise that I've done before, where we take a look at the first words of every sentence and highlight them, bold them in this case, because I think that will sort of give us a starting point to talk about some other things, namely relating to your description that you have going on here, because I do think it's nice, but I think we have a few opportunities to make it even more vibrant, let's say, colorful, let's say. Okay, we have the, every, this, he, the, his. This is technically not the beginning of a sentence, but it's the beginning of this conjunction sentence, so I'll bold it here. If, perhaps, either. So basically, aside from these last couple sentences, we have a lot that start with like the, this, he, his, and that's fine, but I think we could make some changes. You could make some changes perhaps to elevate that a little bit more. Also, I just realized girl, did you do the spacing instead of hitting tab? Sorry, that's just a pet peeve of mine. When people hit the space bar a million times instead of just hitting the tab. Okay, I've just gone ahead and quickly written up another version of this paragraph with the sentence beginnings in mind, and I'm going to talk you through it and some of the other decisions that I also made. So the only thing that made Leonard stop internally whining about work was the birds. Every morning after he turned off his alarm clock and started his day, he'd keep an ear out for the morning doves, for they were his favorite. Today was no different. Leonard threw off his blankets, shuddering from the October chill. Peeking over the horizon appeared the sun, dissolving the mist and steadily warming up the world. His ears strained for the coos of the doves, smiling a little when he heard them. Why did Leonard like the doves best? There wasn't a concrete answer. Perhaps it was because they were his deceased sister's favorite bird, and after the funeral, a friend told him they represented messengers of hope. All Leonard knew for certain was the serenity that overcame him whenever his doves sang. So the first two sentences, I just kept, I think, the same pretty much. This one I did change to start with today instead of this morning, because we already kind of established that this is happening in the morning in the previous sentence when you said every morning. So for redundancy's sake, I changed it to today, and also I feel like today sounds like a stronger starting word than this does. Leonard threw off his blankets, shuddering from the October chill. So that I did change a little bit. Previously, it was shuddered from the chill that inhabited his room after October. It definitely got the point across, but it kind of did so in a little more of a clunky manner. There's a lot of prepositional phrases happening there. And I just don't think maybe your readers need every single detail of that information. So instead, I formatted it in a little bit more of a concise way, but it still has the same idea of shuddering from the October chill. Because obviously he's in his room, you know, like he's throwing off his blankets, he's turning off his alarm clock to start his day. Also, October chill feels more active voice than the chill that inhabited his room after October does. That feels a little bit more passive. Speaking of active and passive voice, that's also what informs informed my choice in this next sentence here. You have the sun was just peeking over the horizon. I changed it to make the action of peeking at the forefront here. So we have peeking over the horizon appeared the sun. And then I kept, dissolving the mist, steadily warming up the world. His ears strained for the coos of the doves. That's also pretty much the same, smiling when he heard them. And then instead of this, where you say if you asked him why he loved the doves the best, I actually included the question. Why did he like the doves best? I think popping in that question there kind of grabs the reader's attention. It's something a little bit different in terms of the sentence structure. It's not a statement, it's a question. And also we had some pretty lengthy sentences, so that also kind of is nice for variation there. So why did Leonard like the doves the best? The way that you have these last two sentences phrased with the or here, or either way, makes it sound like there are two clear different reasons why he might enjoy the doves over the other birds. But then when I sat and I thought about how I would maybe rewrite the sentence, I realized that really both of these reasons are related to this character's sister and the sister's death. So instead of saying or and either way, I said and I just got rid of the either way, and I was like, all Leonard knew for certain was the serenity that overcame him when his doves sang. I thought it could be nice to maybe highlight the feeling that he got from hearing the doves over, hearing the doves, because we already know about him hearing the doves from all of the other parts of this paragraph. So that's why I put this in the front here. I sort of flipped these around. I said serenity, you can keep peace. I just was feeling a little extra, I guess, when I wrote this. So that's why I like doing this exercise where we look at the first words in all the sentences, because it can lead us to other discoveries like passive and active voice usage. How can we strengthen our word choices? How can we strengthen our description? How can we optimize the flow of this paragraph or this statement or whatever? So if all else fails, if you're reading something that you're writing and you're like, something feels kind of off, but I don't quite know why, I would recommend maybe just doing something like this, a little exercise. And then that can lead you to what you recognize subconsciously, but you can't name off the top of your head. I like that you chose mourning doves as Leonard's favorite bird, though. I think I can tell there was thought put behind that, and it's intentional, given the context of the deceased sister and the funeral. And clearly he's like, well, I guess the story is about him coming to terms with the infatuation of his best friend, but then also there's like some grief involved, it seems like. So I think mourning dove specifically is like a really great bird to work with in this kind of story. All right, number 6. This sample is from a fic of mine where a guy, Drayton, I think, learns that his family is ending the search for his missing uncle after years of no results. It explores how he handles this news, including his deflection and repression of his emotions. This scene in particular is of him leaving his school, which, side note, he was held back for like 3 years because he kept failing kind of intentionally. It's a lot, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it does have to do with his uncle going missing. That makes sense. Where you can kind of see his like either processing or not processing of his grief bubble up in different aspects of his life. But he leaves his school, he's leaving his school here to go be with his family and attend the funeral. It's the morning after he had a huge emotional breakdown where he admits how he's really been feeling, so he's still a little bit raw from that. I think we all know the feeling of like having a breakdown or like crying yourself to sleep, and then you wake up in the morning like kind of disoriented. There's also like a little bit of a buzz like in your body and your brain. Okay, here is the excerpt. The trip to the station was uneventful, barring Cyrano stopping him by the school entrance. I'm assuming like one of the teachers or someone who works at the school. In a moment of clarity, the old man had given Drayton sincere condolences and reassurance that the school had his back. It took all of his willpower to not burst into tears right then and there. Instead, he shook the man's hand and thanked him before getting into his flying taxi. The rest of the trip was a blur. Taxi, then train, then another train, club, bus, another club, but okay, sorry. And then walking. Better if he didn't think too hard about it. Okay, I think what sticks out to me most is this little sentence, this little part here. It could be nice if you maybe included another sentence or two about just elaborating on this moment for Drayton and his emotional repression, emotional withholding, like what's sort of going through his mind there. Obviously, I don't know the context of before or after. You might get into that a little bit in another point, but I think it could be nice to also elaborate a little bit on here to really give your readers a chance to really get in the mind of this character. It also could be nice to do that because you did say previous to this he had a huge emotional breakdown, and so talking about going back to that repressive state here could be a nice juxtaposition to what I'm assuming the readers will have just read about him sort of like falling apart and spilling his guts and being really honest and vulnerable with himself, other people, I'm not sure. And then the next day to like sort of snap back into this state of being more like an emotional wall. And if you struggle with, as the writer, putting yourself in a certain character's shoes, what I like to do is, even if I'm not writing something in first person, like that's not how I want the story to end up being, sometimes I'll write certain parts in first person just to help me feel more connected with the character and where the character's at, kind of as a draft, and then, you know, I'll go back and like write it in third person or whatever. So that could be helpful for you here too as well, just to try out. All right, moving on to submission number 7. Here's my submission sample for your upcoming complexity in writing video. The context being Zhang-Woo, I think is how you pronounce it. Just moved into a sketchy boarding house and it's full of a bunch of shady people. During the night where he first sleeps there, a guardian angel, Moonjo, awakens him and informs him that he's resided in the room he's staying at for quite some time and guides new visitors to safety around the boarding house. Eventually, they build a connection where Zhang-Woo becomes dependent on Moonjo in his everyday life. However, this is all a trick into getting Zhang-Woo to do whatever he wants by his side in order to mold him into a new person and join him in the afterlife forever. This kind of reminds me of the concept from another submission we did in the other video that was also kind of like spirit guide-esque. I think I said it reminded me of like a Studio Ghibli kind of film. You guys should become writing buddies maybe in the comments. Alright, but the submission reads, Zhang-Woo's hand and eyes strayed away from the other man's face and onto his large wings that he kindly uncurled from his back and spread open just a tad bit out of reach. The wings were pale in color and silk to the touch. Every feather at first glance bundled together in rows that were reminiscent of a flower peeling back its ridges. A small aura of faded white light poked its head out and around the feathers in the appearance of a dim glow that sparked Zhang-Woo's eyes. Moonjo appeared divine, like a pleading wish finally answered that he never dared to outwardly ask for. Zhang-Woo almost expected himself to wake up at this point. Moonjo stared intensely. The pure amazement he had struck in the other man devoured his soul. Silently, he prayed that Zhang-Woo's eyes could worship the rest of his body so Moonjo could praise him back and be fed with more devotion. Moonjo quickly put together that idea could only work with trust, so he latched onto the stray hand that Zhang-Woo was already about to rest onto his wings and set it down for him. Once his fingers touched his wing, it heaved out a small shiver from his body. Moonjo corrects himself after a sharp gasp, exhales abruptly from his mouth in awe. See, I'm as real as you think I am. Okay, something I just noticed here at the end was make sure that you are staying in the same tense. You go into present tense in this last sentence here, and the rest of it I believe is in past tense, so just a little tiny thing to be aware of. Overall, I do think you have a lot of nice attempts at building description, but I do think your description could benefit from maybe a little bit of refinement. And also, maybe we don't need every single little detail as well. For example, like this sentence here, a small aura of faded white light poked its head out and around the feathers in the appearance of a dim glow that sparked Zhang-Woo's eyes. In my opinion, faded white light and a dim glow are kind of saying the same thing there. It could be a little bit redundant. So maybe just pick one or the other, or, you know, there could be a way to to combine both of them if you like aspects of both of them and you want to try to keep that in there. Maybe like instead of saying a small aura, a faded white light, you could say a faded glow of white light poked its head out. A faded glow of white light poked its head out around the feathers, sparking Jean-Nu's eyes. So that's kind of a way to take aspects from both of these and combine them into one singular phrase that helps to keep your description clear and focused and not like spread too thin. Speaking of the feathers though, I was a little bit confused of this phrase here, reminiscent of a flower peeling back its bridges. I've never heard of a flower, like part of a flower being referred to as a bridge. So I'm not sure if that was a typo or maybe it could be a language barrier thing. I don't know if English is your first language or maybe you just grew up in an area that referred to different parts of the flowers in different ways than I did. But that kind of made me pause and take me out of the story when I first read it because I was just so focused on trying to figure out what you meant by bridges, what you meant by this, that it just took me out of the story. So that could be something to keep in mind as a potential issue for your readers. Perhaps maybe you meant a flower peeling back its petals. That's like the only part of a flower I can think of that kind of could be peeled back in the way that you are describing. But in the first part of the sentence you say they're bundled, but then over here you're saying they're being peeled away from each other. So yeah, I think this simile metaphor situation is a little bit confusing. It's a little unclear what you're going for here. Maybe if you said something like bundled together in rows reminiscent of maybe bouquets of flowers, because those are sort of bundled together or something like that could work. I don't know. You'll have to let me know if you see this, what exactly you meant by this. Another comparison that you had was this one, and I like where this one is headed. Moonjo appeared divine like a pleading wish finally answered that he never dared to outwardly ask for. Again, I like where this is headed, but I feel like in its current state it is a little bit clunky, and again that clunkiness kind of takes me out of the story. That's quite a simple fix though. We could just try to rephrase that in a more concise way. Moonjo appeared divine like you have a pleading wish finally answered, never dared to outwardly ask for. I wonder if we need all three of those components to really get your point across. A pleading wish that's finally answered that he never dared to outwardly ask for. I almost wonder if never dared to outwardly ask for is necessary, because I feel like that could be implied with pleading. Like we could maybe say a silent pleading wish or something like that. Moonjo appeared divine like a silent pleading wish finally answered. From my perspective, that encapsulates what you were trying to go for here with the sentence, but I think this version is a little more concise, a little easier to read, and so it keeps your reader in the story. Obviously, like I said, with other submission revisions, like I'm just writing a sample here off the top of my head to give you an example of what you could do, something along the lines of what you could do, but ultimately, you know, play around with it. This is just sort of like a jumping point. That's what this is meant to be for. Okay, but I think that's really the only thing that I can see of off the top of my head right now. Just making sure you come back to your writing and refine those similes and metaphors and some of that more flowery language to really hit in the way that I think you're intending for it to hit, and to not take the reader out of the story instead of, you know, bring the reader even further into the story, because that's the whole point of including those kinds of literary devices. Okay, submission number 8. I think we have this one and one more left. Hi, I've enjoyed your recent videos and writing analysis on YouTube. Your calls for excerpts had me excited to send in some of my own writing. I'm so glad that so many of you were excited to send in stuff for me and actually did send in stuff for me. I wasn't sure because I'm not like a super big channel right now, so I wasn't sure what the reception would be, but I thought this could be a fun idea. And it's a nice way to, like, I don't know, this feels more productive and more community involved than than me just going through books of like popular writers that people like to hate on and like analyzing their prose. I think that the few videos I've done like that were helpful, and it's what led me to this idea, but I don't want that to be like my whole, you know, brand. So I'm glad you all are wanting to be involved in this to this capacity, and I hope that momentum continues growing because I'm having a fun time doing this, and I hope you guys are enjoying listening to me yap about writing, and I hope you're actually getting something out of this as well. Anyways, back to this submission. Kind of went on a tangent there. I write fanfic and have been in a bit of a dry period recently, so all I have to submit is writing that's a few years old by now. That's totally fine. You can submit whatever writing you want as long as it's yours. I don't care if it was written like 30 minutes ago or 5 years ago or whatever. This particular fic was written in first person POV based on 2 unrelated characters there was minimal information on, played by 2 actors I was familiar with and in a fandom for. The story is a noir time travel mystery involving a train, a bomb, and 2 morally dubious men stuck in a devolving time loop, reliving the same train ride until they figure out how to outlive the journey. Okay, this I was really excited to read because it reminds me of this game that I was watching Vanilla Mace play the other day. That was also like time loop based. It was this guy and his wife that were stuck in a time loop, and the only way to get out of it was like you had to keep everyone alive and like solve the mystery of like who killed the wife's dad. It was very interesting. So that's what this kind of reminds me of. Let's read it. There are children running along the train platform. They have dirty faces and torn clothes, trying to sell butterfly kites at the station to make ends meet. Strangers know better than to lift their eyes from their shoes to meddle in others' affairs. The northern slow train is headed from Dongling to the wondrous Butterfly Valley, a dazzling distraction amidst the gray. Besides the billows of steam along the track, waiting to greet you on the platform is conductor Zhao, wearing his red coat and his perfect smile. Time and time again, this sight greets me, inevitable like gravity. All right, just like 2 little things that I kind of noticed here. The first one being in this last section, you say the conductor is waiting to greet you, and then you also in the very next sentence say that all of this is greeting you again. So I just think having this similar kind of greeting phrasing back to back is a little redundant and not necessary for getting your point across. So maybe just pick whichever one you like better and keep that one. Or let's see, maybe we could sort of combine the ideas in both of these sentences and make it one mega sentence or something. You might be able to do kind of like a list sort of thing. So if you start, we actually start with this ending sentence here. Time and again, the sight greets me, inevitable like gravity, and then do colon, and then we could list the steam billowing along the track and the conductor and like what he's wearing in his smile. Let's see. So maybe something like this. Time and time, I keep saying time and time again, that's not what you've written. I'm so sorry. Time and again, the sight greets me, inevitable like gravity, steam billowing along the tracks, conductor Zhao, his red coat, and his perfect smile. So that's kind of a way to cut down on this greeting redundancy by like just reorganizing really the ideas that you have in this sentence to make it a little bit more concise. I also switched, instead of billows of steam, I said steam billowing, because that feels like a little bit more of an action, you know, of the steam actually moving. When you read steam billowing along the tracks, you can see the movement more, at least in my head. And along those lines, if we want to look at like active and passive voice, maybe like, I don't think this is a super big deal, but if you wanted to change like, instead of there are children running along the train platform, you could just say like children run along the train platform. Instead of there are children running along the train platform, they have dirty faces and torn clothes, you could do like children run along the train platform with their dirty faces and torn clothes. And then I just added an M dash to like add the other part of the sentence because I like M dashes. And honestly, depending on like, do you want to emphasize the trying to sell butterfly kites, or do you want to emphasize to make ends meet? You could even like flip those around if you wanted to have something like this. Instead of trying to sell butterfly kites to make ends meet, you could say trying to make ends meet by selling butterfly kites if you wanted to. Again, it just depends on kind of what part of that do you want to put at the forefront. So just a couple ideas, take them or leave them. Again, this section wasn't like that big of a deal. I'm being a little nitpicky, but just something that I noticed while I was reading. Obviously this is from, you know, a few years ago, so I'm not sure if you're actually like looking to make revisions for this, but if you do ever go back and want to revise this, those are some suggestions. But the story sounds really cool, so love a good time loop concept. Okay, the very last one we have, submission number 9. It's a little bit longer, but that's okay. That's why I saved it for last. This is a micro story that I created to include with a future Depop order. Basically, I'm sending short stories out with clothing orders as a little treat and a way to get my work out there. That is such a cool and creative idea. If I ordered clothes online and it came with like a little story, like a little vignette, I would be so excited. It's 422 words, so it's not super long. Therefore, you can pick a small section that sticks out if you'd like. I feel like since this is a vignette, it would be kind of weird if I only read like a little section of it. The Polaroid was taped to a vintage television set in the middle of a beach, which is unusual for Bonnie Bell. The air couldn't think for itself to be cold or hot, it just broke its own boundaries. Bonnie Bell walked across the sand, taking in the fresh, salty scent of the ocean, and she embraced her curiosity as she stepped closer and closer. It suddenly hit her that the Polaroid had a photo on it that she wished she could blue skidoo into. Her joyful expression saddened as she gazed into the faded, fuzzy Polaroid photo. The photograph presented a house in the middle of an open field. This is where she passed away of old age, the age of 103 years to say the least. Where have all the years gone, Bonnie Bell thought. Why do I feel young? Why did my body give up this way? If I did everything I could, why did I end up here? A low old soul spoke from the television set. Because you have a lot to heal from, child. Bonnie Bell looked below and noticed the television set lit up an angelic hue of light. I have seen you live through all sorts of turmoil. I'm sorry that he left you in several bruises and scars for you to live by. I'm sorry that nobody cared to help you process this trauma that you gained over time. I just want to let you know that you did the best you could. I want to understand. Bonnie Bell's eyes began to develop pools of water and dripped from her cheek. I really want to know where it all went wrong. Why you didn't protect me. Why did you watch while I suffered? You're just like everyone I know. The television set only let out a small hum along with some static. Then it flashed another dimension in front of her, a place where all souls go. Freedom. This is your start of the healing process. Everyone's on their own path, but they all want to the same destination. You are welcomed here. Everyone is waiting for you, stated the television set. As Bonnie Bell pondered her decision, she took in the view of the beach and the vast ocean. There's nothing out there, but the opportunity is in front of her. So she proceeded to leap inside the light. Her body dissolved into a million tiny stars and rays of light, and her soul leaped through time and space to connect the pieces and resolve broken wounds inflicted on her innocence. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I really enjoy this purgatory kind of concept that you're going for here. I think it's really interesting and there's a lot you can do with it. There's lots of different avenues you can go. If you were ever to, you know, maybe one day want to turn this vignette into like a longer work, like a short story or something. The very first thing that tripped me up was this right here. She wished she could blue skidoo into, and I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea what that means. I'm assuming it's some kind of reference to something. I guess I could Google it. Okay, Blue's Clues. It's a Blue's Clues reference, I'm assuming. Okay, references are kind of tricky, especially if they're like popular culture references when it comes to stories. You definitely can make them, and there are lots of authors that do make them and like are successful in what they do. You just need to make sure that you're keeping your audience in mind when you are including these references. Like, are the people who, this is for a Depop order, so I guess the demographic of people who order off of Depop from you, are they going to understand what this means? Or are they also going to be tripped up on it like I was, and it kind of like takes me out of the story a little bit? Because I was someone who, I had watched Blue's Clues as a child growing up, but even I was like, I wasn't quite sure what this was at first. I had to Google it. You can make these kinds of references in your story, but make sure they're actually adding something to what you're trying to say. Like with this blue skidoo, for example, a Blue's Clues reference, I guess maybe you could connect it to the fact that it's a television set, but I'm just not quite sure what a Blue's Clues reference necessarily adds to this story that's like set on the beach and it's kind of like a purgatory vibe. But again, that might just be because I'm not super duper familiar with the reference anymore. Another thing about making these kinds of references, or just any kind of popular culture reference in general, is that it can be kind of tricky because they can definitely make your story feel dated depending on who is reading it and when they're reading it, like when in time. So that can definitely take your reader out of the story as well. Personally, in my writing, I tend to try and avoid those kinds of references when I can, just because I just prefer to keep my writing as timeless as I can. And again, like I said earlier, you don't have to do that. There are plenty of authors that do include current kinds of references, but just make sure the reference that you're making fits within the story and it's actually like adding something to the story. Another thing, watch out for tense issues. You jump into present tense just for like a quick second right here, but that was really the only point that I saw. I went ahead and I just bolded the first word in these sentences here before we get into the dialogue. A lot of them start with like the or this or it. I really only noticed this in these couple of paragraphs before you get into the dialogue, but I did this because I think we could maybe use this as an avenue to rework a couple of these sentences to just better highlight the description that you do include, because you include a lot of it and I think a lot of it's nice. And I want to make sure that it is given the light and the space that it deserves. So let's just look at maybe these top two sentences. I like the action of the Polaroid being taped onto the television set, so I want to make sure that that is emphasized here. So we're actually going to start with that, I think. Taped to the vintage television was a singular, and then I kind of want to take this, like the fact that it's in the beach and she thinks that's unusual, because you know, it is unusual. Instead of just writing it out as a sentence, I wonder if we could write it as like an internal thought of hers for a little more variation. Then we have unusual for the beach, thought Bonnie Bell. So that way we know that this is taking place on the beach, but I didn't want it like all sort of crammed into this first sentence because I feel like that would have been a little clunky to get in there. Taped to a vintage television set was a singular Polaroid. Unusual for the beach, thought Bonnie Bell. Unusual, maybe we need something here. Unusual sight to see at the beach or something like that. Unusual sight to see at the beach, thought Bonnie Bell. Maybe that is a little clearer. Then we have the air couldn't think for itself to be cold or hot, it just broke its own boundaries. Instead of think for itself, maybe we could just say decide. It broke its own boundaries, or maybe breaking the boundaries of nature. Is that like it's superseding the bounds of nature, the air? Because it seems to be flipping back and forth, right? Sort of reflecting this kind of in-between purgatory state, I'm assuming is what you're going for with this sentence here. I won't say superseding though, I'll just say breaking because you said breaking and I think that's fine. So taped to a vintage television was a singular Polaroid. Unusual sight to see at the beach, thought Bonnie Bell. The air couldn't decide whether to be cold or hot, breaking the bounds of nature. What do we think about that? I don't know. Kind of just riffing here. So that could be interesting. That could be, I don't know, something to think about. I almost want to like bring salty up here and have it be salty air. The salty air, and then we could just keep fresh scent of the ocean. Okay, now I'm just like doing my own thing. I'm sorry. I will stop. This is your work, not mine. There you go. There we have it. I've gotten through all of the submissions. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful, educational at all. And if you did, I'd love it if you liked and subscribed to the channel. That's super helpful for me. And also hype this video if it's available to you. That's like a new thing that YouTube is doing that I think gives me a little boost in the algorithm. Like I said earlier, over here at Salted Latte, I love to dive into and dissect language and prose through all kinds of mediums, anything I'm interested in really. So let me know if you did enjoy this, and let me know if I should do more videos like this. I do also have an ASMR channel you can check out if you're into that. I'll have it linked below along with my Patreon if you'd like to support me in that way as well. All of my videos over here and my ASMR videos are posted on my Patreon early and ad-free. And as this channel continues to grow, I'd love to eventually evolve my Patreon into like a little writer circle space for you all. So one step at a time, we'll get there. But that's all I have to say for now. I will talk to you all soon. Goodbye.